Reprise du débat, l'honorable député, the
Honourable member.
Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm honoured to stand in the House today and talk about the budget, of which I'm extremely proud to support. Before becoming an MP, I was the mayor of the great city of Kingston. In this role, I learned quickly the importance of having strong, thriving local communities. This is why I fought tirelessly for increased investment in municipal infrastructure and social services, something I am thrilled to see come to fruition in this budget. Some Canadian families and communities are struggling right now, and infrastructure investments are desperately needed. As some of my colleagues have pointed out in the past, studies that spending on infrastructure when interest rates are low yields more in return of economic activity. The legislation being debated today does just that. Interest rates are at historic lows, and this budget is making meaningful and substantive infrastructure investments from coast to coast to coast. This government has committed to building our communities by implementing a historic plan to invest more than $120 billion over the next 10 years. These investments will help Canadian families by creating well-paying jobs and fostering long-term growth in Canada. This budget helps Canadian communities by providing approximately $3 billion each year for municipal infrastructure projects through the gas tax fund and the incremental goods and services tax rebate for municipalities. Not only that, but the government is also transferring the remaining uncommitted funds from the older federal infrastructure programs to municipalities through the gas tax fund. This ensures funds are directed towards high-priority municipal infrastructure projects. Mr. Speaker, these investments not only help Canadians now, but the benefits will be felt by Canadians well into the future. Across Canada, more than $3 billion is being invested in social infrastructure. This includes affordable housing, early learning and childcare, and recreational facilities. This budget also introduces the Canada Child Benefit. This new benefit will put more money directly into the pockets of Canadian families that need it the most. The Canadian Child Benefit gives Canadian families much-needed help with the high cost of raising children. Children are our future, and we cannot ignore their needs. It cannot be denied that replacing the existing federal child benefits with a simpler, tax-free child benefit is the right way forward, as 9 out of 10 families will now receive higher monthly benefits. More money in the pockets of Canadian families can translate into the ability to buy back-to-school supplies or the ability to afford summer camp or hockey registration. It means healthier food on the dinner table and lunch bags that are not empty. With the Canada Child Benefit, hundreds of thousands of children will be lifted out of poverty. For our young Canadians, like the students of the 3 outstanding post-secondary institutions in my riding of Kingston and the Islands, being Queen's University, the Royal Military College, and St. Lawrence College, this budget makes post-secondary education more affordable. It is no secret that the costs of post-secondary education have become burdensome, with school debt becoming a crippling factor for some Canadian students. This budget boosts grants for low and middle-income college and university students by 50%, helping with the affordability of textbooks, residence, food, and other important expenditures that come with being a student. Over 350,000 full-time students will receive more help as a result of these measures. This could be the difference between graduating and dropping out. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, graduation day will no longer have to be tainted by the worries of student loan payments. I'm sure many of us know students who are preparing to graduate in the coming weeks. The time around graduation should be exciting. These students have worked hard for their diplomas and degrees. This legislation improves the ability for students to get a fair start. With new measures in this budget, students do not have to repay Government of Canada student loans until their income hits at least $25,000 per year. These are some of the changes that are helping Canadian families and local communities thrive. These are the investments I worked hard to see when I was mayor. They are going to help grow our middle class, see more children lifted out of poverty, and provide the supports for young Canadians ready to enter the workforce. Budget 2016 is making sure Canadians have enough opportunity to succeed. For too long, Canadians have been working hard without seeing any results. Like a hamster on a wheel, they have been running themselves weary without getting any further ahead. This is unacceptable, and this budget aims to fix this, because when middle-class Canadians have more money to save, invest, and grow the economy, everyone benefits. It is time for Canada to have a government that focuses on citizens of our country, a realistic government that is compassionate and committed and based on evidence and optimism, not ideology and fear. Before Budget 2016 was released, I had the ability to host a pre-budget consultation as part of a nationwide discussion launched by the Minister of Finance in January. I was able to meet with many members of my community and discuss how the government can make the right investments in order to ensure long-term growth in Kingston and the Islands. Members of my community brought forward a number of key concerns for Kingston and the Islands, including affordable housing and municipal infrastructure funding. I was happy to share their local feedback with the Minister of Finance, and I am even happier to see these concerns addressed in this budget. This budget proves that government is working for all Canadians. It is committed to making investments in infrastructure to grow the economy and help the middle class save and invest more. It is an ambitious plan that will strengthen the heart of Canada's economy, the middle class. It is setting Canadians up for a prosperous and successful future. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, it is clear that the realities of today are vastly different than those 50 years ago. Back then, an individual could graduate high school and have a realistic expectation of finding a well-paying, stable work that can comfortably support a family. Today, Canadians are graduating post-secondary school laden with debt without any security of finding a well-paying, stable job. This budget addresses these realities. The measures I have mentioned help Canadians meet the challenges of today. By putting money in the pockets of Canadian families, growing the middle class, and ensuring Canadian students get a fair start, this budget equips Canadians for success and invests in Canada's future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for his comments. And he used the term hamster on a wheel as it relates to the students paying back student debt. Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't think there could be any more appropriate metaphor than a hamster on a wheel when it comes to paying down the debt that this government is taking on. Mr. Speaker, just a comment here from the National Post by Kevin Libben. He says, quote, "At this rate of deficit and debt accumulation, it can only be a matter of time before the Liberals tax and spend all of us, the rich and the middle class inclusively, into equal levels of misery," end quote. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to have my colleague to explain how on page 234 of the budget, it's clearly outlined there, the increase in debt charges alone of $10 billion per year. How can we possibly get out of this hamster on a wheel rotation when we continue to add to the deficit year after year after year with no credible plan to come back to balance? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, let's not forget who put us on that wheel. It was the previous government. $160 billion worth of debt that we're paying back. The previous member is talking about how we have to try to get out of this deficit situation. It's a deficit situation that his government put us into. Furthermore, this particular member just spent 10 minutes speaking about changes that we need to make and suggested further areas where we need to be spending more money. I beg the question to him of how do you possibly spend more on these projects that he supports, but at the same time lower the deficit? I believe that we're investing the money in the right places in this budget, and at the end of the day, we're going to see meaningful changes for Canadians that's going to build our economy and grow the way that we need to grow for the future. Thank you.
Hear, hear. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Skeena, Bulkley Valley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my friend from Kingston and the Islands for his comments. I have two specific questions. He spent a fair amount of his time talking about affordability of education and the prospects, particularly for young Canadians coming into the workforce. There was a very specific commitment that we as New Democrats made, the Conservatives made it, and the Liberals as well in the previous election just a few 6-7 months ago about ensuring that small business taxes would be lowered. The finance minister was asked after he delivered the budget and reneged on that very specific promise. It wasn't nuanced, it wasn't contextual, it was exact. And he said, well, I looked at it again and thought it was a bad idea. Well, that's a somewhat flippant answer, because the changing of that one policy to small businesses in Canada, which many of those young people will be seeking jobs in or themselves starting, that one decision by the Liberals on small business taxes will cost small businesses about $2.1 billion over the next 4 years. I was in small business before politics, Mr. Speaker. This isn't our suggestion on lowering the small business tax rate from the Democrats wasn't considered a silver bullet. There are many factors that go in, but it was an important gesture, because we had seen the large business tax rate drop dramatically while those Conservatives racked up those huge deficits that we'll be paying for many decades to come. My question is specifically this: if it wasn't such a good idea, why campaign and promise to do it? And now that the Liberals have broken that promise, not spoken the truth to Canadians about what they were actually going to do, when can we see the promise delivered? Because if it was such a good idea to campaign on, clearly it must be a good idea to actually govern on as well.
For Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for that question. For clarification, we have adjusted the way that the government has adjusted the way that they're going to be handling the particular small business tax. It might not be as aggressive as my colleague would like to see, but let's not forget where we are investing in reducing taxes, and that's for the middle class. If you want to grow an economy, and we know that small business is the backbone of our economy, if you want to grow an economy, you're going to do that by putting more money back into the hands of the consumers. And that's what we're doing by lowering taxes for the middle class, putting money back in their hands so that they can go out and spend it in and with these small businesses. Thank you.